No, it's not happening. It's spinning. Now we're live.
Hi, everyone.
Oh my goodness.
Kicking off with a bang, per usual. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Awakening Educator. I'm Megan Sweet.
I'm Susan Andrian, and I'm putting my phone on Do Not Disturb. So
There
we
you go. That's good. And we're really excited to be kicking off season 4. So this is our season 4
Woo-hoo!
kickoff show. I can't believe we're in season 4. That's kind of hard to believe, actually.
It is kind of hard to believe. It's been a lot of fun.
It has been.
We've got to
We've
talk to
learned
a
a lot.
lot of amazing people, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So we thought as we're kicking out season 4, we would check in with each other. Well, the shows have still been rolling out mostly. I think we had about a month gap. In reality, we've had a few months between the last interviews and this one, and we've both, as always, are really busy. So I thought it would be good to check in on our latest developments, learn a little bit about what we've been up to, and give a preview of what's to come in season 4.
Yeah.
Susan, you've been learning a lot. So maybe we start with you. What have you been learning and what have you been up to, Miss Susan?
I've been learning a lot. As you said, I've been training with the Forest Therapy Hub, which is an international forest bathing and forest therapy training institute located in Portugal. And I've been combining that with a lot of the learning that you've heard in previous seasons with the neurosequential model, and really trying to think about how these joyful ways of healing are really connected to our neurobiology. And I've been partnering with Destiny Arts, which is a local arts, performing arts and violence prevention program, and just sort of starting to root the neurosequential stuff, which you've all heard me talk about if you've listened to this show before, and really trying to ground that in some joyful, how do we bring this to joyful healing? How can we reimagine what healing looks like, what education looks like, what our lives look like, in ways that are really rooted in our neurophysiology. So it's been a lot of work, and I'm super excited about this next phase of my professional and career, and actually personal lives are changing too. So it's an exciting time. And
Yeah,
you've been up to a lot too, Megan. What have
well,
you?
yeah, we'll get to me, but I want to talk a little bit more about what you've been doing because, you rattled off these really interesting things, but I'd like to explore them a little bit more deeply, and say that I'm incredibly grateful that someone like you is in the world focusing on nurturing and healing and reconnecting us to joy, because I think as a global community, it's so desperately needed right now. And someone like
Yeah.
you in particular, who has so much love, and it's just nurturing being around you, for you to be bringing that to the world. I'm incredibly grateful. Let's talk about the forest bathing first, because that's a
Yeah.
term that maybe not everybody knows.
Yeah.
I know it because I actually wrote about it in my book.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Japan they call it forest bathing too, which sounds really fancy.
Mm-hmm.
But what is forest bathing?
Well, as you said, it started in Japan, and it's Shinrin Roku. Roku, is that how I say it? I think that's how
I
I
don't
say
know.
it. And it's translated to English to exactly like that, forest bathing, and so that's where the term comes from. And in Japan, it started in the 80s as a wellness practice for stress reduction, where it's just spending time in nature, connecting to nature. And in this model, the Forest Therapy Hub is looking at what about that has been healing, and also combining it with some other practices of social connection, and really looking at theories of looking at a number of different social wellness theories, and trying to understand the role of nature in that, and our connection. What they found is, both in Japan, and there's tons of research coming out around it, that when just spending time in nature itself is healing, and then when you add onto it a practice of engaging your senses intentionally and thoughtfully, mindfulness, which you reference in your book, and where your expertise is in mindfulness. It's taking the practices of mindfulness in nature and really engaging your senses deeply, in noticing sights, sounds, smells, your body. And when you do that in natural environments that have all of these, nature's incredible because it has negative ions and it has all these things that are just there. And so when you just sit in that nature, your body automatically engages in ways that are healing. So the practice is just be in nature. The Japanese wellness practice of forest bathing. Forest Therapy Hub has been taking that up a notch and has created a sequence of engaging activities that are done to improve your body. And you'll learn more about that in season 4 because we do interview Alex Geese, who is the founder and executive director for Forest Therapy Hub, and he really he's going to share with us some more about that. But
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, and so in Japan, they have forest bathing as a part of their national health,
mhm,
like program.
yeah,
And it's, and it makes sense. I think all of us, when we are in nature, we feel better.
yeah,
And maybe we can't always put our finger on it. And I think we've talked about this in the past. I think the ways that that can look can be really different. I probably referenced it when we interviewed Alex, but it's, I feel like so much of the things that we now talk about, I stumbled upon
mhm,
accidentally, in not in desperation necessarily, but in like a real effort to connect with my kids and find ways to help myself feel better in what is always a stressful profession and has
mhm,
gotten far worse lately.
mhm, mhm,
And just the act of like digging in the dirt, doing gardening, all those
mhm,
things are really profound, in
mhm,
terms of helping us feel better, and now there's some science that helps us to understand why, that there are these negatively and positively charged ions and other things that literally recharge our batteries. Because I think we
yeah,
often forget that we have an electrical system inside of us. We don't plug
mhm,
ourselves into a wall outlet, but actually nature would be a good place, for example, to plug ourselves back in,
yeah,
and that we
yeah,
we feel better, and we're so isolated from that in a world where we have rubber shoes and we often, I
yeah,
live on the 3rd floor of a building, so we're literally separated from nature in so many ways, and it's just such a necessary part of our lives. So I'm super excited that you're doing it. I know you're also starting to integrate this in some ways in your private therapy practice where you're doing walking therapy sessions,
yeah.
outside. I wonder if you see the connection between those things.
Oh, definitely. They're definitely, related. I'm leaving my current position in the district that I've worked in varying roles and varying partnerships for 20 years. So it's oops, an exciting and pretty scary time.
Yeah.
And part of what I know, taking the neurosequential stuff, which talks about pattern, repetitive, rhythmic, there's a lot of evidence that doing therapy while walking and moving, it gets into different parts of our brain. It activates different ways of being regulated, and so there's growing bodies of evidence that there's a lot of power in healing, talking and walking at the same time, or just even walking in with a supportive co-regulating presence and sort of
Yeah.
using that body centered way of moving. And so combining that with the sensory connection activities, my hope is to have a small practice of walking therapy that's engaging nature, but also using the neurosequential model with Dr. Bruce Perry together, combining those practices together to really maximize healing and wellness. I'm rereading um, the emergent strategy and pleasure, and now I've just started pleasure activism again, which is our local Adrienne Brown, for she's from Oakland, and really thinking about how, and Sean Jenright at the same time. So there's this theme of moving away from like problem loving and um, activism that's sustainable by like how do we make it joyful? How do we make sure we include the pleasure, because it's not sustainable. And if we're constantly doing this work in relationship to the pain and forgetting like what do we want to see, how do we engage the environment to be more joyful. And so that's, I'm excited about the private practice part. I'm excited about just, it feels like everything that has felt good to me over the years, just sort of coming together in this coalescing way, um, and leaving the system and still being a part of it, but from the side. And I think educators often feel, many educators, I'm not the only one. We have a mass exodus of educators, and it's a difficult decision. But I really struggled with that decision because it felt like I no longer, I'm sure I believe in the way that we're doing things. And as I watched what has happened and how we've responded to this pandemic and the returning back in, I just didn't feel like I could continue at the pace I was doing, and I needed more joy. So it's
Well,
exciting.
I applaud you making that decision. I know it was, I mean, I had a front row seat, and so a lot of ways I got to see how much you were working with it. And I know part of it is just that you're just so loyal and protective of other educators, that you want to make sure
Yeah.
that they're taken care of and are supported. And I was watching how much you were burning out, because you're somebody who people go to, when there's a fire, you're running into it. The fires
Hmm.
are emotional breakdown or child, extreme trauma responses to things, but that takes a toll.
Yeah.
And so as a friend and someone who loves you and who knows all of what you have to offer, I'm really excited for you. And I know it's scary, and I think you're going to do great. And already I know you're getting some clients, and I think you're going to have the problem of turning people away. I think you're going to have too much to do, versus
Yeah.
not having enough. And that's a good problem to have.
It is.
Yeah.
And Chris is already like on, my husband and partner of 20 plus 20 24 years, um, is on, he's on deck to make sure that I keep try and keep a
You can't
lane.
imagine he'd be shy about that. So I think
No,
he's a good accountability partner in that way.
he is in that way.
Uh,
Yeah.
Susan and Chris are both from Boston, and Chris definitely carries more of the Boston in him on the daily than Susan.
Yeah, he's good at the loving accountability for
He's
sure.
not shy, so it's good. That's what's needed. And I'm excited that your family's in the place to make this happen, because I know you've been working on it for a long time. So that's great. You also are starting like you have a website. So Susan,
I
can you tell us
do.
how people can find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, the name, I'm launching, part of the work in this is I don't want to do it alone. And so I've started the collective, which is, it's right now it's just sort of an idea at this point, but if you are interested, I'm looking to bring together healers, educators, folks who are interested in reimagining what education can look like, reimagining what healing can look like, reimagining joyful communities. And so the name of my venture, which I haven't decided if it's a business or a nonprofit, still working in that piece of it, is Hope Reimagined. And you can find us at hopereimagined.org. We have a number, I already have some forest bathing uh, trips coming up that folks are welcome to sign up through the website. If you are an educator, you can reach out to me for our educator discounts for forest bathing. But again, that is hopereimagined.org, and you can learn all about it. Our mission is every community deserves an abundance of hope, healing opportunities, and playful environments. And so, really, the goal is to collectively bring people who are interested in making that a reality come together and engage in the joyful and complex and sometimes challenging work of moving that forward.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't even know that HOPE was an acronym. So that's really neat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
healing opportunities and playful environments.
That's exactly what we need.
It is exactly what we
It's
need.
exactly what we need. That's really cool, Susan. I really love that that's going on, and I cannot wait to get out in the forest ways with you, which I think is happening next week. Is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, not next week, May 7th. So by the
Oh,
time
May
this
7th. I have
podcast
some
comes
time.
out, I think it'll be a couple weeks away.
Okay. So if people are Bay Area locals, if you're a Bay Area local, go to hopereimagine.org, and you can learn how to be a part of it, perhaps in person. in one of Susan's upcoming forest bathing adventures. And
Yeah.
I'll be there at least for one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you're also traveling, I've been doing some traveling. I'm actually traveling right now. I'm in St. Louis right now. I'll be presenting at the Trauma Informed Relationship Conference, and then doing a full day workshop following. So if your school or community is interested in learning about how to create therapeutic environments, um, optimizing your community to be healing and playful, joyful places, I'm happy to work with you in your organization or your school to develop training or
That's very
coaching.
good. Nice. Very good.
Yay. And now we should transition to what you're doing. You got a lot
Oh,
going on too. We are some busy mamas.
we are busy mamas. Too busy on my end as usual. Yeah, speaking of speaking, I think I actually just updated my CV a couple weeks ago, and in the last 3 years, I've given somewhere over 30 talks at presentations at conferences around the world. Most of those virtually because COVID, and some of those in person. So I've done a lot of traveling too to Chicago. So I was in Illinois just last month, and uh, Hawaii in January, and have been doing some locally here in California. And it's been a real pleasure and opportunity to coalesce some ideas that have been rattling around in my head for a while. So, I wrote and published this book pre-pandemic, the Educator's Guide to Using Your Three Eyes, which is all around this concept of how to like the necessity as us as humans. I framed it around educators because that's the group I know well, but that for us to be successful in really creating the changes and the educational environments we want for our kids, we need to start by developing a nurturing and loving relationship with ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
start working on ourselves. So I call that self work. So you do the self work at minimum alongside the school work, but ideally, sorry, my phone started ringing. I did not turn it off, even though you did. We need to do the self work at minimum alongside the schoolwork, if not totally separate. So that's what I talk about in different forms. Are your earbuds not working?
No, they're working now.
Okay.
They fell out of my ear.
Suddenly all the technologies started going off all at the same time. My phone is still going off. I'm just trying to ignore it. So that's what I've been talking about essentially is that. So when I wrote the book originally, and 3 years ago, I think people thought that I was a little bit crazy and this idea was a little bit ridiculous. But now I think it's become like an accepted norm.
You were
Um,
ahead of your time, Megan,
Out of my
ahead of your
time, sister.
time.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
uh, and many people were. I was
Yeah.
referencing research that's been around, so certainly not trying to claim like I invented all this stuff, but it is cool now that, when I wrote the book, it was just really hard to get people to buy into it or to understand
Mm-hmm.
why, like, because a lot of that self work is like taking care of ourselves and nurturing ourselves, applying
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness, forest bathing, accessing joy. Um, and that you need to do that so you can understand more about yourself and do some of the harder work that's
Mm-hmm.
also lying underneath the surface. Because we bring our whole selves to our schools
Right.
and we often ignore that. We only focus on the training we have or on the technical skills it requires for us to be a teacher or a therapist or whatever, but our human selves are there as well and our lived experiences are there. And when we pretend like those two are divorced, we actually do ourselves a disservice. We certainly do our students a disservice. And we're not able to be as effective in our job. So that's my idea. So I've been talking about it in three kind of ways. One is just straight up mindfulness and why mindfulness is important. So I do love teaching about mindfulness and leading
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness like retreats. I haven't done a lot of those lately, although I did a couple. I was invited to participate in a mindfulness conference for educators that was in Korea. So I did it remotely, but in December, I think, I got to beam into Korea, and my head was something like 10 feet tall on the screen. So I had to ignore all of that. But I was in Korea, being able to speak and give presentations there. So I do talk a lot about mindfulness and why that's important. It's a lot of what we just talked about, reconnecting with ourselves and taking care of ourselves is so important, especially in this time. But also when we
Yeah, I know you
don't.
talk about grounding in your book too,
Mhm,
the electrical magnetic field
mhm.
and that piece,
Yeah,
which is
all
part
the
of forest
things.
bathing.
Yeah. So that's there. And so I talk about mindfulness and why that's important, and why if we aren't mindful, we're actually just kind of undermining our own efforts.
Mhm.
So that's one like bit of work that I've been continuing to work on. The second is um, I've been talking a lot about servant leadership, which is a
Mm.
similar version of the same thing, but essentially focused on leaders. Like
Mhm.
why, and like I'm a big believer in servant leadership. That's definitely how I lead, but like why in this time in particular, it's kind of
Mhm.
urgent for leaders to take that stance where we're
Mhm.
listening, where we're empowering people. It's much less of a top-down white supremacist approach towards leadership. When you're
Mhm.
doing servant leadership, you're listening to others and drawing on their assets.
It's like the
Um,
decolonization of
mhm.
leadership.
Absolutely. So I talk a lot about that, and so I've done quite a few talks on that, around the country and virtually, and yep, that. And then the last thing that I've been working on lately is it's all interconnected and related, but is I got a micro grant or a mini grant, I guess, uh, to try a little pilot that I'm calling School Stories, and essentially it's absolutely connected to all these other pieces that
Mhm.
I focus on, which is that we need to understand and know our stories and own our stories. And there's actually a big body of research that says that when we tell stories, two things happen. One, we learn a lot more about ourselves. And so if educators write in the third person point of view, for example, about something they did, we're like to process, say, something that happened during their day. Just the act of writing it out, they gain these really powerful and deep insights that shift and
Mm.
shape their practice. So that's one thing that happens when we tell our stories. The other thing, and the thing that I think is really crucial for this moment we're at in education, is when we tell stories, it creates and draws people in as an audience in a really different way. So when we get stuck in the intellectual data, like
Mhm.
facts and figures, we miss out on like the story part. But stories actually move us to action in a way that the facts and figures do not.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I got a micro grant to be able to, or mini grant to be able to um, explore this a little bit more and see if the storytelling thing had legs. And what I did is I turned around and turned them into micro grants, which is why I keep saying micro grant, because that's what's on my mind. And was able to provide scholarships for 23 educators from around the world to participate in the Op-Ed Project. And the Op-Ed Project is a nonprofit that trains people to tell their stories, and to write an op-ed and prepare people to be able to have those op-eds be published. So we were able to give that to 23 educators, one of whom her op-ed was published in the largest newspaper in Africa, which is where she
Wow.
lives. I haven't heard from the others if they've been able to get their op-eds out there. But actually, she talks about and what she wrote about in her op-ed, and we interviewed her on the podcast. So two of my grantees we interviewed, and there will be a show called School Stories that features them. But she writes about taking kids out to do mindfulness in the forest, because where she lives in Africa, the forest is right there, and how that's transformed the kids that she supports. So very connected to what we were talking about earlier.
Mm.
So I've been doing all of that, and my consulting firm. I tend to spend most of my time coaching educators. So I coach like superintendents and assistant superintendents, sometimes principals, on creating change. And so I help them to engage with community, envision changes, and roll those out. So I have a very much of a front row seat of what our executive leaders are facing in this moment, and it's really
You're doing a lot
difficult.
of strategic work with them too, right? Like
Yeah,
really
I do
helping
strategic
them.
planning with them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't they like the mindfulness stuff, but what they need is the strategic planning, and so that's what we do. And I love strategic planning, and it's some of the work that I like to do. But in my goal is by June is to actually have a lot of my online courses ready to go. So I have an online site on Teachable called Your Three Eyes. So my school is Your Three Eyes, YUR3 EYES. On Teachable, and I have courses there, but my goal is to launch those courses as live action courses during the summer, so I can problem solve and work with educators around the world
So
around.
they'll be synchronous. They'll be
Yeah,
live
they'll be
instruction.
synchronous. I've been offering them as asynchronous courses, but I'd like to have them be synchronous so we can actually have some of that back and forth. And I'm
Hmm.
working on a second edition or a revised edition of my book. It's great the way it is now, and the gift of the last few years is that because suddenly people understand this topic a little bit more,
Hmm.
there's a lot more information. So I just want to take another
Hmm.
look at it and see if I can
Yeah.
bump up the research a bit, and then create a companion workshop, workbook, which I've been wanting to do for a very long time.
Yeah, that was almost a plan from the beginning, if I
3
remember,
years
was
ago,
to,
that was the
yeah.
plan. And I haven't done it, so I want to finally
Yeah.
get that done. So my goal is to get all those things done in the next couple of months and just really buckle down and do it, because I think this summer educators need to rest, but I also know this is when we try and think a little bit more. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the reflect. It's it's the so important time to pause, recharge, and reflect. And I think that there's never enough of that time, but the last couple of years, there's been zero of that time.
yeah,
Like there's been nothing. Teachers have been going, educators have been going, principals, superintendents, everyone who's involved in education right now has just had their foot on the gas for for years. I know in Oakland, spring break came really late. And I'm not really sure why, but it just came really late, and you could really feel the like almost hear the pop, 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 pop to the finish
mhm.
line. And so I think the work that you're doing around that self work, about that stopping, pausing, going internal, really making time to make sense of what this experience has been and how to learn from it, how to grow from it, how to redo some things before we come back. I think both of us continued to say throughout the pandemic, like, how are we going to emerge from this better than we came in? And so far, we haven't done that yet, um, not at all. And I don't know what's going to happen at the end of the school year, but it does feel like the loss of educators, the sheer number of educators that are leaving, is going to cause some kind of rethinking.
Yeah, I'm actually I've been, in addition to all my other activities, I've been being a co-principal at a high school this semester. I came in January, so at the height of the Omicron impact, which was super awesome and fun. And we have 3 open positions, and for in the height of the Omicron, we had no subs. There were days where we
Yeah.
had half the teachers out, and not just for a day, we'd actually have weeks because
Yeah.
of the requirement for quarantine. If someone was out, they'd be out for 2 weeks. So we'd have weeks where we'd have almost half the staff out. And now actively have 3 positions open that we have not been able to fill. And that is unusual.
Yeah.
It's been hard, it's been getting increasingly difficult to find teachers, but now it's just become like almost impossible. And
Mhm.
I feel for the kids and what they're experiencing.
Mhm.
I feel for the adults that are at the school, because it
Mhm.
absolutely leads to an additional burden on the people that are there when there are open positions, because we have to fill them
Yeah.
every day because the kids are
Yep.
there. And as we're looking, as I'm supporting these other school districts, like trying to find people at every level of the organization, it is difficult. The number of
Yep.
applicants is far smaller.
Yeah.
And
And I think it's about to get harder at the end of the school year.
absolutely, I think
You
you're
know,
right.
there's
People are like squeezing in, like not squeezing, like sliding into the finish line, and then they're going to walk away.
they're gonna walk away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm highly
And
concerned.
there's article after you see on Facebook or in education publications weekly, um, this concern, the exit. There's the resignation across the country in all kinds of areas, but I think in education it's higher. And teachers are seeing that they can, they're so highly skilled, and they can leave education and go into corporate jobs or nonprofit jobs that pay better and have far less stress
Much better
and
work-life balance.
much better
Hmm.
work-life balance. And I think the other thing that has been so hard is that because the families are also really, really stressed and really also feeling the impact, that there's been teachers have taken the brunt in a lot of places around the distress of the families, who then take it
Hmm.
out on educators, who are then treated poorly by the families. And that, I
Absolutely true.
think,
Absolutely
is
true.
probably the number one thing that is driving teachers out.
Yeah, it's been interesting, right? So when we went to online learning, suddenly parents had a view of what was happening in instruction in the classroom in a way that they didn't.
Mhm.
And parents became activated because they started to understand education in a different way, which is great.
Mhm.
And but as it's been a perennial issue in education, but I think you're right, it's absolutely gotten worse. Rather than trying to understand what's underneath some of the gaps that they're seeing or the challenges that they're seeing, they're just looking at the first person they can see and kind of poking at that person,
Mhm.
or the principals or assistant superintendents or superintendents. Like anyone in education system is getting so much pushback.
Yep. Yep.
But
And
many of
and
the
it's
things
showing
that,
up in things like I coach someone in a district that I don't work in. Um, I just want to clarify so that it's not shown who it is, but uh, their parking lot situation, right? Because parking is dropping off and parking. Like if you have a kid who's in elementary school, any school across the country, the drop off is always, you
nightmare.
need an
Hmm.
engineer to come in there, or traffic control
Hmm.
person.
Hmm.
Um, and the teachers don't want to be in the parking lot anymore because they have been yelled at, and treated so poorly repeatedly by
Hmm.
parents, that
Hmm.
it becomes such a level of stress that staff members are like refusing to cover and support in that area because the yelling from families, and we know the families are under a lot of stress too, and that's contagious. But I think that's an example of, even not even in the instruction piece, just in the humanity of those positions.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're totally right, Susan. Yeah, I'm seeing it, and it's unrelenting, to be quite honest, because not
Mhm.
only are there challenges coming from parents, but teachers and administrators are also getting pressure from districts, from
Yep.
other places, and like school leaders have pressure after pressure after pressure after pressure
Mhm.
coming their way,
Yep.
and it's incredibly difficult. So you're getting it from every angle.
Mhm.
Yeah, the folks that
Yep.
I support, I see it, and I can see
Yep.
the impact of that, what that looks like and feels like for them, which is why we need hope.
Yep.
This is
That's why
why
we
we need
need hope.
mindfulness.
Yep.
So I'm really grateful that
Yeah.
that we're doing that. So maybe
Right.
it's
It's
a
so
good
easy to
segue
fall
to
into
what
the
we're doing this
problem
week.
loving, right? We
Huh?
just fell into
We just did it.
problem loving. It's
We
so
went to
easy to
problem loving.
fall into problem loving. And Sean Jenwright, he talks about that too in the book, and I'm really working hard not to. And we just did it. Surely. No.
Dogs. It was Shirley. You're right.
Yeah. Um it's so hard not to. And I think that as long as we continue to, and it continue to stay seated in that position of problem loving, we're not going to be able to reimagine the other. And I think that was really what drove the decision to engage Hope, Hope Reimagined outside of there. And I know you've been there, you got there a lot sooner than me, but it is still hard, right? The pull to come back into the problem.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm still in it, right? So I'm a school
Yeah.
board member. I work with leaders, and I feel the burden of it, even when it's not directly me. But I feel the burden of it in the folks that I support. And I did chose to actually go right into I went into the fire, being at a
Mm-hmm.
high school right now, where it's just so stressful every day.
Yeah.
I'm hoping maybe we can get Sean in there. I mean, I know Sean. He's
Yeah.
local. Maybe we can get Sean on our show. I think that would be really cool, because he's such a great. I could listen to him all day,
Yeah.
talking, and I think it'd be great to bring him to this audience. So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to ask Sean to be on our show.
That would be, yeah, I think he's really, his book that just came out, The Four Pivots, is really aligned with both what your book is about and what Hope Reimagined is about. Is really, it's not ignoring the level of problem that we have. It's not denying it. It's not that's really important work, to like be honest about the situation that we're in, but then also to be able to open up with curiosity, to be able to create the space for imagining not just what we're against, but what we're for, not just what's wrong, but how to make things right. And I think that's where I'm hoping that, I know you and I are both really wanting that, and so I think that's the focus of season 4 a little bit, is like,
Mm-hmm.
how do we start to really embrace the solutions that are innovative, creative, and one of the quotes from my forest bathing training, and I think it was Pedro. I want to credit it to the right person, but it was, forest bathing is both uh, very ancient and cutting edge. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, how do we, and mindfulness is very ancient and cutting edge. It's like, how do we pull and draw from all of these ancient practices that were they worked for thousands and thousands of years, and they were abandoned for capitalism and industrialization and all the ways that we've come forward. It's like, how do we revisit those things and bring them into the current moment and take stock of what we have available to us in this moment?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, you named it. So our theme for season 4 is how do we solve this problem, but not in a problem loving way, but in a
Right.
nurturing way? How do we connect to joy? How do we highlight examples of people that are out in the world making those changes, that are real and tangible? Because I think it can feel just impossible. So if you're one of those people and you're listening, reach out to us.
Yeah.
Uh, your3eyes.com or hopereimagine.org. Our email addresses are there. You can
And I
also
actually
talk to
have
us
a
on our.
button that on the media page where folks can fill out, if they're interested in being a guest on the show, you can just fill out the form on hopereimagined.org. And I
Oh,
can share
great.
that with
And
you too, and if you want to update it on your 3 eyes.
yeah, you can also, we both have Facebook pages, for our
Mm-hmm.
businesses, with links to being able to message us there. You can also just reply to this.
Yep.
We're being live, reply here, and we will see
Yeah.
you and we will reach back out to you. Because we want to focus on the solutions in a way that's generative and that, is going to be nurturing and transformative. So, we're here for it.
Yep. I, for, I forgot to share it with all my people on Facebook. We just went live and I didn't even tag anyone. So we have somebody watching. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, Shirley's chiming in. She says thanks
Okay.
too. Susan, this was great to touch base with you again. I know in the coming weeks we already have shows starting to go out. So
Hmm.
starting on next Thursday, our first guest will be coming out. We've been doing some interviews. School Stories will be the first show up. So those two micro grantees will be talking. As I mentioned, one of them does mindfulness with kids in Africa and takes them off and out into nature. And the other is a woman who is working to disrupt the education system through empowering African American youth to kind of take their future in their hands. And she said something when we interviewed that I thought was just, I just loved it, which is like, we were talking about equity. And I was like, right, as a white person, I see my role as making a space at the table. And she's like, no, what we need to do is just make a new table. I was like, right,
Mm-hmm.
of course. So she talks a lot about like the work she's doing to create a new table where there isn't someone who's giving access to it.
Right.
But actually, we need to have a new table, metaphorical table, where everyone's able to show up. So she's exciting. She does really cool work, lots of mentoring with kids around helping them to envision, basically putting their businesses into life. That's what they're about.
So good.
That'll be the first show, and then we have a forest bathing show coming up with remind me his name again, Eric.
Alex Geese.
Uh huh. What? Say it again.
Alex Geese.
Alex Geese. It's not Eric at all. It's Alex. And 'cause nothing against you, Alex. I have no memory for names, as Susan will attest. And we've met with somebody who's a sports coach. Her show's coming out, as well as another educator that we interviewed, who lives in Texas, who has been all the things, which I always love to highlight those people who have
Yeah,
been all the
he
roles
was
in
he was really
education.
fun.
Yeah, Sam Nick.
It's
Mhm.
a fun interview. Really encourage you to check out that one. He was really great to talk
And
to.
similar to what we talked about, a
Yeah,
heart-centered and intentional approach to leadership. So
yeah,
it's catching, and I love it. And we want to bring more of those stories forward so that we folks can see what it looks like and see themselves in the change. Um, so Susan, thank you for this time this morning. I really appreciate
yeah.
it, all the way from
As
Illinois.
always, yeah. And we'll see you on the other side.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye, everyone.